The night was lit up with lights that danced the rhythm of loud music, in a room where glasses clinked and there was a lot of laughter, but all empty. There, between walls decorated with fake gold and fleeting promises, a woman dressed too brightly smiled at everyone, except herself. Her eyes, although carefully painted, carried a silence that no lipstick could hide. She danced, she twirled, she drank, but inside, she was falling apart. Behind the room, among torn bags and cardboard boxes wet from the recent rain, there was a trash can, large, metallic, cold. The kind of thing no one wants to see or remember that it exists. Inside it, 2 small bundles of stained sheets moved slowly. They cried, but the sound was muffled, not for lack of strength, but because the world around them never learned to listen to this kind of pain. Twins, tiny, newborns, abandoned as if they were a mistake, as if they were no one. The glass of a bottle shattered as it fell from her mother's purse. It was expensive champagne. Golden shards remained on the sidewalk, shining under the red light of the sign that read, "Victory Celebration." Victory of what? She didn't look back. She just fixed her smeared makeup, as if it were covering not her face, but her entire past. She climbed up on her heels, laughed out loud at someone who was calling her, and went back into the ballroom, where the world doesn't ask questions, just dances. And there, behind the wall of celebration and falsehood, the most innocent love in the world shivered with cold and hunger. No one saw it. No one heard it, except the sky, which at that moment grew darker than usual, as if the ancestors had turned their faces away, in respect for the pain that not even the drums dared to announce. But abandonment, as cruel as it may seem, is never the end. Sometimes it is just the bare soil where a new story needs to be sown. Sometimes what the world throws away is exactly what will teach the world how to truly love. It was too early for the day to begin and too late for the night to end. The city was still asleep, but she was already up, as always. Her bare feet marked the cold mud, while the cart creaked behind her with the weight of what others no longer wanted. They called her crazy, dirty, a living shadow. But no one knew her name, nor that her silence held secrets that only the forgotten know. She stopped in front of the trash can by instinct, not by habit. There was nothing of value there, at least not in the eyes of those who measure the world with labels. But there was a sound, small, irregular, a cry that was neither of a cat nor the wind. It was human, fragile, desperate, and she heard it. She always heard what others pretend does not exist. The lid creaked with difficulty. The smell was cruel, but what was inside was even more serious. 2 lives piled up in rags. 2 girls, twins, their eyes still closed, their tiny fists moving, as if they wanted to grab life before it escaped. The woman hesitated. Her instinct said go on, like someone who has learned that welcoming someone is also hurting oneself. But her heart said something else. It said that abandoning someone who has been abandoned is repeating the mistake of the person who hurt them first. And she, however forgetful she was, refused to hurt them. She covered them with the cloth she used to protect her head. It was neither clean nor pretty, but it was warm. She knelt down. She picked them up one at a time, as if they were pieces of her own past that had been rediscovered. And she murmured something, words that no one heard, but that her ancestors understood. "If you listen to me, I promise I won't run away." The cart, which had previously carried only leftovers, now carried hope. She continued on, without looking at the hall. There was no need. What was a celebration for some was abandonment for others. But in that silent gesture, without applause, without witnesses, a new line was drawn in the destiny of those children. Because sometimes the greatest miracles begin with those who have nothing, but still have the courage to listen. They grew up in silence, not the silence of absence, but of resistance. The kind of silence you learn when the world insists on reminding you that you don't belong. When your lunch is changed, when your uniform is always the most worn out, when your last name has no story, or has one that no one wants to hear. That's how it was for the twins, walking among children who had everything, carrying the weight of having come from nowhere. The walk to school was long. Wearing holy flip-flops, they walked through the dry dust that stuck to their ankles and to the pages of their notebook. The same notebook, year after year, stained, crumpled, but still whole, just like them. They always sat at the back, not by choice, but because that was where the others left space. And even in the background, they seemed to stand out, not because of their brilliance, but because they were different. Their patched clothes drew attention. The smell of the fair in their hair revealed the beginning of the day. Their silent hands revealed their origin. Mockery came like small stones, thrown in jest. Daughters of the trash, someone muttered. Another imitated crying, as if remembering where they came from. They didn't answer. They learned early on that words, when born from pain, can be a knife or shield, and they chose silence as their shelter. But at night, in their cramped room with dirt floors, they drew what they couldn't say. Stories of invisible people who became heroes. Tales of a land where no one was disposable. The Notebook, which so many saw as dirty, was the only place where they could be everything. Princess, warrior, vigilante, griot. And there, between scribbles and shaky sentences, something was being built without them realizing it. A knowledge that didn't just come from school, but from the courage to keep going there. A kind of faith without words, of those who don't believe out of conviction, but because giving up hurts more. With each page written, the shame transformed. It was still there, in the dust, in the teacher's squinting gaze, in the classmates' muffled laughter. But little by little, it took on another form. It turned into strength. It turned into desire. It became a silent promise. They will still hear my voice. They will still respect my story. And even without knowing how, they kept going. Because sometimes resisting is already dreaming. And dreaming, when no one believes in you, is the greatest act of faith there is. It was on a gray morning that everything stopped. The school corridors, usually filled with hurried footsteps and scattered voices, were quieter than usual. Something had happened, something serious, a disappearance, money that had disappeared from the teacher's lounge. And, as in stories too old to be fair, fingers were quickly pointing, and always at the same faces. She didn't understand at first. She was organizing the borrowed books, with the care of someone who knows the value of each page. She was suddenly called, taken to the principal's office. Inside, the looks were hard, as if they had already decided the end before hearing the beginning. They accused her. They said she had been seen nearby, that her presence there was too much of a coincidence. There was no proof, but there was no defense either. Only the color of her clothes, the silence of her origin, the past that no one forgets when they want to condemn. She trembled, not for fear of punishment, but for the old wound that was reopening, being treated like trash again, being seen not as a student, but as a threat. She was almost expelled. The principal didn't shout. Her tone was worse, cold, objective, like someone who cleans what they think is dirty, like someone who solved problems by erasing people. It was her sister who came in without being called. She knelt in front of the table, her heart beating louder than her voice. She said it was her, that she took the money, that she was sorry. And in that invented confession, in the truest lie ever told out of love, she saved the other. They hugged as they left the room, while the walls still echoed judgment. No one realized that there, in that gesture, a promise was sealed, to never let the world destroy one alone. The pain of that morning didn't go away with time, but it transformed. It took root. It became a memory that burns, but also strengthens, because in a world where so many point fingers, they chose to protect. And this choice, even without a diploma or award, was the first step towards freedom. Sometimes, what almost destroys us, reveals us, and what remains after fall is always stronger than what came before. She sold leaves and spices in a stuffy corner of the market. She could not read or write, but she had an ear that remembered everything. Her hands were shaky, but her memory was sharp. Her laugh was short, her eyes deep, and her presence discreet. For many, she was just another shadow among the stalls. But for the twins, she was a respite in the midst of chaos. The meeting began without plan. One day, when she noticed that the two always passed by without buying anything, but with their eyes full of desire, she called them. She offered a uga leaf and a handful of salt. In exchange, she asked for a story. Any story. "Tell me something beautiful that will make me forget this heat," she said. And they told their stories. One spoke, the other gestured, and the saleswoman smiled. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, this became routine. A story for a handful of flour, a tale for 2 nearly ripe tomatoes. And in that unequal exchange in the eyes of the trade, an invisible economy was born, where what mattered was not money but imagination. The lady didn't know she was watering a seed, nor did they know they were blossoming. One day, without them noticing, someone listened. They stopped out of curiosity, stayed out of enchantment. They asked for more. They came back. They brought friends. And the girls began to tell their stories to more ears, more smiles, more attentive silences. The lady just watched. She never charged. She never interrupted. She just said from time to time, the right word can heal more than medicine. She was the one who gave them an old tape recorder. It was broken, but all it took was a cleaning and a push of faith. They recorded their first stories there with shaky voices, without scenery, without technique, but with soul, with truth. One afternoon, a friend from school used her mother's cell phone to film one of the narrations. It was just for fun, a joke, but the image was sent to someone who knew someone, and without understanding how, the video ended up on the internet. It was shaky, the sound was loud, the lighting was almost non-existent, but the words spoke deeply. They spoke of a woman who planted hope in clay pots, of a boy who talked to shadows, of a child who didn't know his name, but knew how to love. It was fantasy, yes, but it was also true, and those who listened to it didn't forget it. The video spread. The numbers went up. The comments were many. Some made fun. Others said, it sounds like something from an old radio. But there were those who felt, who cried, who remembered, and among them, someone was willing to pay. He would pay for the rights to the story. He wanted to turn it into a book, an audiobook, something bigger. Fear came first. Would it be a scam? Would they be stolen again? But there was also the strange feeling that, for the first time, someone saw value in something the world had always ignored. They didn't know how to negotiate. They said, yes, more out of fear than certainty. And suddenly, what had started as a joke became a formal proposal, with a contract, with a signature, with a figure, still small but real. The money arrived along with the doubt. Was it fair to earn money by telling stories that were born from pain? Was it right to transform scars into products? But they soon understood this wasn't exploitation. It was liberation. It was like giving words back the dignity they had always deserved. And in each written comma, there was the echo of what they had experienced. Because sometimes successes begin with mistakes, and what the world calls a stumble may be just the first step on a path that no one saw. Yet, the address was the same. The street hadn't changed its name. The facade still bore marks from the past, cracks, faded graffiti, an iron gate that creaked as always. But now, when they passed by, no one saw poverty. No one saw abandonment. They saw a new, discreet, and elegant sign with the name of the company that had grown from the words of the two sisters. It was there, exactly there, behind the salon where they had been left to die, that the headquarters of the empire they were born to build now operated. It was not by chance that they chose that place. There were others that were more beautiful, more central, more convenient. But they wanted to go back, not to relive the pain, but to transform it, like someone who writes a new letter over a cruel note, like someone who plants a leafy tree over the rubble, like someone who looks at the trash and sees gold, not by magic, but by memory. When they bought the building, they made sure to keep one space intact, the back where the old dump was. There, they had everything cleaned up. They planted a small baobab tree, still young but full of life. Next to it, they buried a wooden box with the stained sheets, the rag from the collector, and the old tape recorder. A silent ritual, a tribute without an audience. Just the two of them, the ground, and the spirits that saw them born from abandonment. Today, anyone who enters that building sees innovation, progress, and success. But anyone who looks with an attentive heart notices something else. They realize that each step there is made of scars, that each table, each screen, each meeting carries an untold story. The story of two girls who were told they were worthless and decided to prove without shouting that they were worth everything. Because sometimes true power is not in building from scratch, but in rebuilding exactly where everything was broken, where there was loss, to make a promise, where there was silence, to make a voice echo, and where there was contempt, to plant respect. It was an ordinary afternoon with a heavy sun covering the entrance to the recently renovated building. The reception was full. People looking for jobs, business partners, young people dreaming of opportunities. In the middle of the line, a woman, thin, hunched over, worn clothes, her eyes sunken, her skin dried by time and absence. She was shaking, from the cold or from shame, no one knew. But there was something in her eyes that hesitated between moving forward or disappearing right there in the middle of the concrete. When she reached the main entrance, the security guard kindly stopped her. He asked for her name, reason, identification. She stammered. She said she was looking for help, that she had heard about those two generous girls. She didn't know their names. She only knew that she had come to see if what they said was true, that no one was judged by their past. The security guard hesitated. He called someone. When one of the sisters appeared, time stopped, not for the woman's face, which had changed, aged, almost unrecognizable, but for her eyes, the same ones, the same sad curve, the same dull glow that had once shone for just a moment. She recognized them, her mother, the one who had left them, the one who had walked away from pain, and now returned with it in her body. There was no scream, no accusation. The sister just looked at her, and the entire past passed through her. The muffled cry in the trash can, the old cloth, the school, the humiliation, the principal, the tape recorder, everything. And yet, there was no hatred. There was astonishment. There was silence, a thick silence, like fog before the rain. She didn't hug. She didn't run away. She just called the other woman. The two of them stood before the woman. They listened. She didn't say much. She said she didn't know what to do, that she was afraid, that she made a mistake, that she never forgot. The shame weighed more than the pain. She didn't ask for forgiveness or love, just a minute, just a look, and that's what she got. Before leaving, one of the sisters put a gold coin in the woman's hand, not a commercial value, but symbolic. On it was written, "You have not been forgotten." The woman didn't understand. She cried without making a sound, and she left with her hands closed around that small gesture, because sometimes forgiving isn't forgetting. It's remembering with dignity and choosing to no longer carry what isn't yours. It's looking at abandonment and deciding that it won't have the last word. The square was full, but it wasn't an event. There was no stage, no microphone, no special lighting. There were people, ordinary people, young people with worn backpacks, mothers with children in their arms, silent men who seemed to carry invisible stones on their shoulders. They were there because they had heard that something was happening, something different, something that didn't demand anything in return other than their presence. The twins arrived without fanfare, without escort, without announcement. They walked among the people as they always did, with their heads held high, but with their hearts exposed. They brought simple boxes full of envelopes. Each envelope had a name, a handwritten letter, and a scholarship paid for with their own money. There weren't many, but they were seeds. They climbed up a small concrete wall. One of them was holding the old tape recorder, the same one. Her voice was shaking a little, not out of fear, but out of emotion. She looked around and said, "You are not disposable. You never were. Sometimes the world throws away what can shine the most, but the shine comes back. And when it comes back, it doesn't come back to itself. It comes back to illuminate others." Silence, then applause, timid, sincere, like a light rain after a long drought. There were tears, yes, but there were also smiles. And at that moment, the entire square seemed to breathe a little easier, because it wasn't just about helping. It was about dignity, about recognizing value where they had always said there was none. At the end, the two knelt before the baobab tree planted there weeks before. They held hands. They were silent. It wasn't a prayer of words, but of presence, a reverence for what came before, for what hurt, for what survived. And so they ended not like the girls in the trash can, but like women who chose to transform pain into healing. They didn't forget. They didn't erase. They just knew that some scars don't need to disappear. They need to shine, like gold, like a legacy, like a voice that was once silenced, and now teaches you how to sing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even trash can give birth to light, then don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of the next stories. Leave your like, comment on what this journey awakened in you, and share it with someone who needs to remember that their pain does not define their destiny. Because together, we spread more than content. We spread hope, and that the world still needs to learn to value